As Act 1 runs to over 30 pages, I'm going to give a detailed analysis of the first half of the act, as far as Mason's second entrance on page 16 in the Heinemann Educational Books edition. I'll discuss the rest of the act in the next video. Journey's End by R.C. Sherriff was first performed in December 1928. Sherriff goes to great pains in his initial stage directions to place the action of the play at a very specific location, in a dugout in the British trenches before San Quentin, and at a very precise moment in time. The curtain rises on the evening of Monday, 18th of March, 1918. The play's 3 acts cover the 3 days leading up to the Battle of San Quentin, otherwise known as the Second Battle of the Somme, which began in the early hours of Thursday, the 21st of March, 1918. The battle took place on the first day of the spring offensive of a German military operation codenamed Operation Michael. The biggest barrage of the war began just before dawn, with over 3.5 million shells being fired in the space of only 5 hours. Trench mortars, mustard gas, chlorine gas, tear gas and smoke canisters, as well as heavy artillery, rained down on a weakened British army, prior to the German army, camouflaged by dense fog, mounting a massive attack. The first and second lines quickly fell, leaving thousands of British casualties. The first audiences, watching the play only 10 years after the events it dramatises, would have been painfully aware of the outcome of this battle, and the fact that they knew that not very many, if any, of the characters they were going to meet would make it out alive at the end, makes it all the more poignant. The set does not change at all during the play. A new scene merely indicates a change in time, and Sherriff gives quite precise directions for how he wishes it to appear. The evening of a March day, a pale glimmer of moonlight shines down the narrow steps into one corner of the dugout. Warm yellow candle flames light the other corner from the necks of 2 bottles on the table. Through the doorway can be seen the misty grey parapet of a trench and a narrow strip of starlit sky. A bottle of whisky, a jar of water, and a mug stand on the table amongst a litter of papers and magazines. An officer's equipment hangs in a jumbled mass from a nail in the wall. The way in which the action remains in this small dugout throughout gives it a real sense of claustrophobia, making us feel in some small way almost as trapped as the men. Note the prominent placement of a bottle of whisky on the table, indicating that the consumption of alcohol is to be given a central role. Not only does it numb the men's anxiety and help them muster the necessary courage to fight on in horrific circumstances, but it is also a cause of conflict amongst the men during the play. Act 1 comprises a single scene, and as such is the longest period of continuous action in the play. Sherriff uses this first act to establish the setting, to introduce characters and themes, and to lay the groundwork for dramatic tension and conflict, as the play's plot progresses to its inexorable conclusion, the German attack. He skillfully modulates the dynamics of the scene as the various characters enter and exit. Note the different ways in which the characters interact with one another to provide a different pace and tone. The way in which Osborne and Hardy interact as 2 experienced officers of the same rank, for example, is very different to how Osborne and Mason, 2 experienced soldiers of different rank and different social status, interact, which is different again to how Osborne and Raleigh, one experienced officer and one new and naive officer, interact. Note also how Sheriff also breaks episodes of tension with episodes of light relief. Captain Hardy, the outgoing commanding officer, and so Stanhope's counterpart, is already on stage as the curtain rises. He's a red-faced, cheerful-looking man who is sitting on a box by the table, intently drying a sock over a candle flame. And as he carefully turns the sock this way and that, he feels it against his face to see if it is dry. His first speech, the singing and humming of a song, is striking for its introduction of one of the play's central preoccupations, that of the passing of time. He lapses into an indefinite humming and finishes with a lively burst. Tick, tock, wind up the clock, and we'll start the day over again. Osborne enters and Sheriff's stage directions immediately signal that he is a very different character to Hardy. The removal of his helmet reveals a fine head with close-cropped iron-grey hair. He looks about 45, physically as hard as nails. Sheriff constructs in Osborne an understated character who is a quietly steadying and unifying force, which he underscores by making him present throughout this scene from the beginning to the end. The opening dialogue between Osborne and Hardy, often tinged with dark humour, reveals some of the conditions that the men have to endure at the front line, such as the routine drinking of whiskey. The first thing that Hardy does is offer Osborne a drink. Splendid, have a drink. The poor sanitation, which necessitates strong-tasting disinfectant in the drinking water, with Osborne giving his opinion that "I'd rather have the microbes, wouldn't you?" And the waterlogged trenches, indicated by Hardy's wry comment about his sock being guaranteed to keep the feet dry. Trouble is, it gets so wet doing it. We also learn that the men are subjected to long periods of silence that are suddenly broken by sustained shelling attacks, which must play havoc with their nerves. Hardy tells Osborne, in another reference to the passing of time, sometimes nothing happens for hours on end. Then, all of a sudden, over she comes. Rifle grenades, minis, and those horrid little things like pineapples, you know. His use of onomatopoeia to describe the sounds they make when they fall seems to suggest that he takes an almost malicious pleasure in preparing Osborne for what he's in for. Swish, 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 bang. Osborne's refusal to rise to Hardy's deliberate baiting of him is an early indication of the steadiness and maturity of his character. His only response to Hardy's description of the way the roof fell in when the trench was shelled is to remark quite mildly, "I know, there's nothing worse than dirt in your tea." Why then, we ask ourselves, given the conditions under which they are living, is Hardy so jolly? His reason, as well as his selfishness and tactlessness, are revealed in his question to Osborne. "You know the big German attack's expected any day now." He knows he's leaving, so won't be in the immediate line of fire, and couldn't care less that other people are. "Then I should think you'll get it, right in the neck." This also provides the play's first instance of dramatic tension, and introduces the anxious anticipation and sense of doom felt by all of the characters, and the audience, that is an undercurrent throughout the action as the time of the attack gets ever closer. Sheriff also uses the character of Hardy in this section of the play to provide information about Stanhope before his first entrance. He initially sets Hardy up as a foil to Stanhope. Both are commanding officers, but that is where the similarity will end. Hardy is best described as lazy half-hearted and indifferent, the antithesis of what Stanhope will be revealed to be. In his dialogue with Osborne, he makes it known that he is not interested in the men he commands. When Osborne asks him where the men sleep, he merely responds, "I don't know. The Sergeant Major sees to that," and reveals that he has kept the best bed for himself. Additionally, the rifle grenades in the trench stores are rusty. There are odd numbers of left and right boots, and the checking of the inventory has been left, surprise, surprise, to his Sergeant Major as well. Not only this, but Hardy, an incurable gossip, cannot resist dishing the dirt on Stanhope and his drinking. How is the dear young boy? Drinking like a fish, as usual? We learn that Stanhope has become an object of curiosity and fun for the men as he reveals that they timed him, drinking a whole bottle of whiskey in 1 hour 14 minutes. Osborne is suitably unimpressed, revealing his anger that when a boy like Stanhope gets a reputation out here for drinking, he turns into a kind of freak show exhibit, which he likens to bear baiting or cockfighting. It's clear that the men are so in need of entertainment and have been so dehumanised by the war that they are able to get their pleasure even from watching a boy drink himself unconscious. What we also learn from Hardy is that Stanhope is something of a loose cannon. But you're quite right about his nerves. They are all to blazes. Last time out resting, we were playing bridge and something happened. I don't remember what it was. Some silly little argument. And all of a sudden he jumped up and knocked all the glasses off the table. Lost control of himself, and then he sort of came to and cried. This evidence that Stanhope can lash out quickly and erratically adds another layer of tension and anticipation for the audience. Osborne's subsequent stout defence of Stanhope in the face of Hardy's insinuations has a number of dramatic functions. It primarily gives Sheriff an opportunity for exposition, filling us in on Stanhope's background, i.e. that his father is vicar of a country village, a man who certainly wouldn't approve of Stanhope's dependence on alcohol. Osborne also gives us an idea as to why Stanhope might be such a hard drinker, revealing that he's been on active service for nearly 3 years. He came out straight from school when he was 18. He's commanded this company for a year, in and out of the front line. He's never had a rest. Other men come over here and go home again ill, and young Stanhope goes on sticking it, month in, month out. And that I've seen him on his back all day with trench fever, then on duty all night. This speech gives the audience a deep insight, not only into Stanhope's character, that he possesses a noble sense of duty that won't allow him to take what he would consider to be a coward's way out, even if it's to his own detriment, but also into Sheriff's critique of a war that took what were effectively children straight from school and mindlessly thrust them into conditions that robbed them of their mental and physical health as well as their innocence. It additionally serves to present Osborne's character as being one who offers unswerving loyalty to those he admires and cares about. He dismisses Hardy's comment that it is he who should be leading the company rather than Stanhope with, "Don't be an ass. He was out here before I joined up. His experience alone makes him worth 12 people like me," and effectively pulls Hardy up short with, "You don't know him as I do. I love that fellow. I'd go to hell with him." Hardy quickly manages to get the subject changed through poking fun at Osborne for what he perceives to be a very unmanly declaration of affection for Stanhope. "Oh, you sweet, sentimental old darling." It's worth noting, before Hardy exits, the part where he notices the earwig on the table and observes that it has been running round and round that candle since tea time. Must have done a mile. This presents the audience with an image of futility where, for all the running the earwig has done, it has not got anywhere or achieved anything. The parallel with the conduct of the war can clearly be seen, as this sense of pointlessness was a feeling that would haunt both the soldiers and increasingly those left at home as the conflict continued to grind on and the wasted lives continued to pile up. As Hardy exits, Mason, the officer's cook, enters and begins to set the table for dinner. In this very brief exchange between the two, Sheriff introduces a different dynamic to show how the hierarchy in the army closely followed the hierarchy of the British social classes. Through the character of Mason, Sheriff introduces a man of both inferior rank and inferior social class, which is shown through the manner in which he speaks. Not only does he tag most of his comments with the obligatory "sir," but Sheriff literally spells out the way in which he pronounces words differently, like new rather than new, and that he drops his H's. "Yes, sir, ordinary ration meat, but a new shape, sir. Smells like liver, sir, but it hasn't got that smooth, wet look that liver's got." As Mason exits, no doubt to continue preparing the supper, Raleigh enters, groping down the steps to stand in the candlelight. He's described as being a well-built, healthy-looking boy of about 18, with the very new uniform of a second lieutenant. A rather stilted conversation with Osborne ensues, in which we realise that he is extremely wet behind the ears. A boy of 18 who was still at school last summer, but who, because of his public school education and his well-connected relatives, has immediately been made an officer in spite of having no experience. Raleigh then drops a bombshell which will have implications for the rest of the play, as he reveals that he and Stanhope were at school together. At least, of course, I was only a kid and he was one of the big fellows. He's 3 years older than I am. It quickly becomes apparent that Stanhope is the object of Raleigh's hero worship, not only for his prowess on the sports field. He was skipper of rugger at Barford and kept wicket for the 11. Jolly good bat too. But also because he turned up at school when he'd just got his MC and been made a captain. He looked splendid. Note that the dashing sight of Stanhope in his uniform, sporting a military cross, has merely fuelled Raleigh's idealism and filled him with a burning desire to join up himself, blissfully unaware of the horrendous reality that will await him. We then learn that Raleigh has effectively pulled strings with his uncle, General Raleigh, who is in charge of detailing officers to regiments, to ask that he be put in Stanhope's company. Sheriff uses the way in which Raleigh tells this story to reveal the level of his naivety. "I went to see him on the quiet and asked if he could get me into this battalion. He bit my head off and said I'd got to be treated like everybody else. The next day I was told I was coming to this battalion. Funny, wasn't it?" The dramatic tension is clearly building. Not only is a German attack imminent, but Stanhope, when he arrives, will be forced to confront the state that he is in personally, i.e. the extent to which he has deteriorated mentally and how he needs to be drunk in order to function. The audience hasn't met Stanhope yet, but can already see that Raleigh's arrival is going to cause conflict, as Stanhope's two different lives, which he's managed to keep separate up to this point by taking his leave in Paris rather than going home, will collide. The character of Raleigh will serve to highlight what Stanhope once was. Firstly, through his very presence. He is effectively what Stanhope was 3 years ago. But also with regard to what Raleigh knew him to be during those holidays when he stayed with them before the war. It's interesting to observe how Raleigh can't help referring to Stanhope as Dennis, which serves to underline to the audience how he still has an image of Stanhope as he once was. Not only does Raleigh have idealistic views of war and of Stanhope, both of which can only be shattered, but he also has a sister to whom Stanhope has an emotional attachment, and whom Raleigh intends to write letters and tell her all about him. We can only imagine Stanhope's horror when he imagines how he will be seen through Raleigh's innocent eyes. Osborne is clearly sensible of this, as he tactfully attempts. Note his hesitations indicated by dashes and repetitions as he searches for the right words, to prepare Raleigh for a change in him. You know, Raleigh, you mustn't expect to find him quite the same. You see, he's been out here a long time. It tells on a man, rather badly. You may find he's a little bit quick-tempered. Raleigh, it seems, is well acquainted with Stanhope's quick temper, and takes the opportunity to relate an anecdote, heavily laced with dramatic irony, to Osborne. "Oh, I know old Dennis's temper. I remember once at school he caught some chaps in a study with a bottle of whisky. Lord, the roof nearly blew off. He gave them a dozen each with a cricket stump." The contrast between Stanhope's reaction to the prohibited whisky in Raleigh's story and his attitude towards it now is not lost on Osborne, who once again tries to prepare him to make allowances for Stanhope's current state. You must remember he's commanded this company for a long time, through all sorts of rotten times. It's a big strain on a man. If you notice a difference in Stanhope, you'll know it's only the strain. The remainder of the dialogue between Osborne and Raleigh up until Mason's entrance is given over to Raleigh's orientation, as Osborne familiarises him and the audience with life in the trench. We learn that the officers never undress when they're in the line, presumably so they're always ready for an attack, and that officers take it in turns to do about 3 hours on duty. When Raleigh is told that they are only 50 yards away from the front line, and he remarks how frightfully quiet it is, Osborne tells him that it's often quiet like this. In fact, most of the time, in yet another reference to the passing of time, the men are generally just waiting for something. When anything happens, it happens quickly. Then we just start waiting again. It's no wonder then that the men's nerves are shot to pieces, living as they are in a state of fearful anticipation. The final section of dialogue in which Osborne and Raleigh talk about the very lights, which were flare guns either used for signalling or for temporary illumination, creates a poignant note, as the experienced Osborne endeavours to give the naive Raleigh a piece of advice. There's something rather romantic about it all. You must always think of it like that if you can. Think of it all as romantic. It helps. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques, and English literature texts.